Hey everybody, it's Scott here at Extreme Performance Training Systems in Atlanta, Georgia. In this video, I want to talk a little bit about the strength training program that I use for my fighters and combative athletes. Kind of piggybacking on the last video that I did where I gave a little bit of an overview of how we go about training the grapplers and the fighters that I work with here at Extreme Performance Training Systems. I got some questions regarding the actual strength training plan. So what I want to do in this video is just talk mainly about the strength training and how we build the program that we do with them and kind of how we put it all together and why we do what we do. So again, this video, we're just going to focus on the strength training that we do with the combat athletes here at the gym. And, this is not the total training that they do on a weekly basis. In addition to the strength training, they're doing cardio, they're doing flexibility and mobility, various other conditioning workouts. They've got their sport-specific practice. There's many things that they're doing throughout the week. So I just want to focus on strength training because some people are kind of surprised when they see how little that we actually do. So I just want to make that, kind of apparent, before we get going here and I start talking about this, because really we're only training about 2 days, 2 kind of quality strength training sessions a week. So kind of want to get into that here. Like I mentioned, we're usually doing about 2 training sessions a week with the guys, and the training sessions are broken up in a way. I follow, if you want to call it the conjugate plan or the conjugate programming method that was popularized from Louis Simmons at Westside Barbell. But basically, what we do is we break this up into 2 main sessions a week, where one day is focused on dynamic effort training, the other day is focused on maximal effort training. Both days we implement exercises with the repeated effort method. So over 2 days, we're working the dynamic effort method, the maximal effort method, and the repeated effort method. Now, if you don't know what those are, they're talked about a little bit in depth in Vladimir Zatsiorsky's book, Science and Practice of Strength Training. Louis has talked about these extensively in the articles and the books that he's written and the podcasts that he's done. There's so much information out about these methods, and we implement them, like I said, on a weekly basis, the same way that he does with his Westside programming, meaning that we don't work really in a training block. We don't have a group of 4 to 6 weeks where we're just focused on one skill, and then we don't roll into another block and another block like a lot of people do in a block approach to train or block training method. I'm not going to get into a debate whether or not what we do is better than block training or not. All I know is that what we do works extremely well for the guys that I've worked with and the girls that I've worked with. And I've got, I didn't come up with this stuff. I took what I learned from Louis Simmons. I took what I learned from a lot of the books and things like that he's recommended, and doing my own research and practice in the gym for nearly 20 years now. I've also made a couple of visits up to Westside Barbell to train and learn from him firsthand to try to make even more sense of this type of training. And like we said, we've seen nothing but exceptional results here with the people that I work with at the gym. I use a similar approach with all my athletes, but it's tweaked up differently based on the sport, their position within the sport, and how much time they have that they can allocate to training. And I think that's one of the things that you really need to focus on. Training cannot, and when I talk about training here, I'm talking about general physical training. So when we're talking about an athlete, whether they're a combat athlete participating in jiu-jitsu, mixed martial arts, football player, baseball player, it doesn't matter what the sport is. But when we're talking about an athlete whose sport isn't lifting weights, like a weightlifter or a power lifter, they compete in a sport where they actually have to lift a barbell, clean, jerk, and snatch for the weightlifter, squat, bench, and deadlift for the power lifter. So their specific training occurs in the gym. All other athletes, everything done in the gym is general physical training, meaning that we're using a non-specific training modality to increase their physical preparation for their sport. So you have to look at the schedules of these athletes and what they're doing on a weekly basis and make sure that they're able to recover from the training that you're implementing, the physical preparation that you're implementing on a weekly basis. All training needs to be recovery based. If they can't recover from it, they're never going to get better. So that's why I've found with most people using 2 full body, most of my combat athletes, using 2 full body workouts per week is usually the way to go in regards to strength training. Now, like I mentioned before, they're doing additional conditioning, cardiovascular, anaerobic, aerobic training. They're doing extra flexibility, mobility. They might be doing some joint health exercises. There's other things that they're doing in addition, but these are the main intense, I hate that word intense, but these are the main strength training sessions that they're doing on a weekly basis. Okay, so this is where the bulk of the work is coming in regards to strength training and their programming. So like I said, we pick 2 days a week, usually like a Wednesday and a Sunday, or a Thursday and a Sunday is when most people train. We try to get about 3 days in between training sessions. So usually they're training Thursday, Sunday, or Wednesday, Sunday, something like that. 1 day, again, is devoted to dynamic effort method, where they're moving submaximal weights with maximal acceleration. The other day is dedicated to max effort lifting, where they're lifting limit or near limit loads for the primary lift. Now, the way that we structure the training day, there's usually about 6 exercises that we do on a daily basis. Now, this is just a general overview. There's a lot of fluctuation based on the individuals that are training that day, and there's a lot of kind of customization that happens based on what it is they need. If one of them's getting ready for a competition, they might be in a taper. We usually do about a 3-week taper going into a competition. So again, there are factors at play here that may affect what they're doing on a daily basis. But generally speaking, we usually have about 6 primary exercises that we're going to get done on a day-to-day basis. We always start out with jumps. Learned this from Louis Simmons. We try to do 40 jumps twice a week. That's the volume that we work. Younger athletes, we do a little bit less. We might do 20 jumps twice a week. More experienced athletes might even work up to maybe 120 jumps throughout the course of the week. But basically, we're getting about 80 jumps a week, 40 reps over the 2 sessions. So we always start out with the jumps. I shouldn't say we always start out with the jumps, but in the majority of the time we start out with the jumps when they're fresh, and we focus on that explosive power development. Sometimes we do have them jump in a fatigued state, but for the most part, we usually start the workout out with the jumps. The jumps that we implement, there's a wide variety of them. We will periodically, maybe about once a month, we do max out the jump and see how high that they're jumping. We do this onto a box. They've got records on various heights of box jumps. And that allows us to program the volume for the jumps for the rest of the training sessions throughout the month. So for instance, if somebody jumps onto, like my grappler Logan has a personal record of a 51-inch box jump right now. So generally he's going to work at about 80% of 51 inches for the majority of his work. Now that's going to change if he's doing heavy jumps with heavy weights in his hands, or if he's going to do jumps with a weight vest on, or ankle weights or something like that. You know, if we're doing weighted jumps, which we do usually some sort of weighted jump once a week. But generally, if he's just, working on jumps, he's going to be jumping at about 80% of 51 inches. And that helps him adjust the box height for his training. Now, like I said, we do a variety of weighted jumps. Sometimes they'll hold dumbbells, sometimes they'll hold kettlebells, sometimes they'll wear weight vests, they'll wear ankle weights, wrist weights. We just do a variety of resisted jumps. We also do jumps from a seated position. We do jumps from a kneeling position where they start out on their knees, they jump, they land on their feet, and they jump onto the box. But the majority of the time, we're jumping up to a box. The reason that we use box jumps, and again, this is not exclusive to me, I learned this from Louis Simmons. I've read this in many training manuals that I've read over the years, but this is the conclusion I've come to is the best way to jump, because it allows us to jump year round, because jumping up onto a box minimizes impact forces on the body. If you do jump downs, like where you're doing a depth jump where you're standing on a box, you're stepping off, you're hopping off, you're landing on the ground, then you're jumping onto another box, as you do in true plyometric exercise, those impact forces are pretty dramatic on the body, and we don't do those year round. We might cycle those in before a very important competition for a short period of weeks, maybe up to 4, 6, or even 8 weeks. But for the most part, throughout the year, we're jumping up on the boxes because it's minimizing the impact forces on the body. Less chance of injury, and they're still producing a tremendous amount of power jumping onto a box. So again, we always start the workout out. We generally start the workout out with the jumps. Generally speaking, we do 40 reps over 2 workouts a week, so they're getting 80 jumps a week. The second exercise, depending on the day, if it's the dynamic effort day, we're going to do some sort of speed strength lift, and if it's the max effort day, we're going to do some sort of max effort lift. Generally, the lift is going to be a deadlift variation. We do a ton of sumo deadlifting with these athletes, and we do them from a variety of positions. We deadlift off with the plate sitting on blocks. We deadlift with the athlete standing on blocks in the deficit position. We do deadlifts, rack deadlifts, where the bar is placed in the power rack, and we deadlift off the pins. We deadlift against bands, chains, bands and chains. Sometimes we deadlift in our belt squat machine. And there's a ton of different ways that we deadlift here. So the majority of the dynamic effort lifts and the max effort lifts are going to be some sort of deadlift or deadlift variation. That may include good mornings, may include Zercher lifts. And we also do a lot of squatting. We do box squats primarily with a wide stance, because the exercises that we implement with these athletes, since they are combat athletes and since hip strength and power is so important, that's why we like these wide stance lifts. So a lot of sumo deadlifting, a lot of wide stance box squats. With the squatting, we generally don't use a regular straight bar across the shoulders because shoulder issues are big with these guys. Sometimes they deal with a lot of shoulder injuries because of the various joint manipulations and just some injuries, some wear and tear that they get from training. So the last thing that I want to do is externally rotate that shoulder and then load a barbell on top of that. So generally the squatting that we're going to do is going to be a Zercher squat, where they're holding the bar in the crook of the elbows. We do a lot of squatting with safety squat bar, where they've got a padded yoke that goes around the neck so that they don't have to externally rotate the shoulder and hold on to the barbell. They can just wear the yoke around the neck, and they usually just hold on to the ends of the yoke collar. We do a lot of belt squatting, where we have a machine that the athletes wear a belt around their hips, and the load comes up out of a cable through the deck. It's like a pulley machine. So now all the load is placed on the hips. There's nothing on the upper back. So there's very reduced risk, almost no chance of back injury while they're doing belt squats. No worry about damaging the shoulder while they're doing belt squats. All the loads placed on the hips and allows them to squat in a very natural squatting pattern. So we do a lot of box squats in the belt squat machine too. So those are primarily all the variations that we do on the dynamic effort lift or the maximal effort lift. The only difference is on dynamic effort day, we're going to be working somewhere around 20 to 25 reps. Usually 5 sets of 5, 8 sets of 3, or 10 to 12 sets of 2 are the loading parameters that we use for the dynamic effort method. And we're generally using about 50 to 60% of a max as far as the bar weight's concerned. And then we use somewhere around 25 to 30% band tension or chains added resistance on top of that, and accommodating resistance. So accommodating resistance is the use of bands or chains, where it allows us to match the athlete's strength curve. So for instance, in a deadlift, we might have bands going across our platform over the bar, and they might provide about 100 pounds of tension at the bottom of the lift. And then as the athlete grabs the bar and stands up to a lockout, the band tension gets greater and greater. It might get up somewhere around 200 or 220 pounds at the top of the lift. So there's a bit of a contrast there. But the idea is that as the athlete's getting into a more mechanically strong position, the band tension is getting greater and greater and greater, so it prevents deceleration. Again, the dynamic effort day, we're doing about 20 to 25 lifts over the course of the workout, usually in doubles, triples, or sets of 5, usually with some form of accommodating resistance on the bar, whether it's bands, chains, or a combination of both. On the max effort day, we're usually working up to an all-out 1 rep max. There will be some debate as to whether or not you should do a 3 rep max or a 5 rep max or a 1 rep max. I look at it like this: you do 1 rep, your chances of getting injured are less. You do a 5 rep max, you got 5 chances of getting injured. You do a 3 rep max, you got 3 chances of getting injured. And a max effort is 1 repetition. You know, the higher the max effort set that you're doing, if you do a 5 rep max or a 3 rep max or a 6 rep max or something like that, you're getting further and further away from the athlete's absolute strength. I don't think lifting for a 1 rep max is dangerous. I think it's more dangerous to do a 3 rep max because of the accumulated fatigue from rep after rep after rep. I prefer the 1 repetition maxes, and we're usually doing those in some sort of variation of deadlift, good morning, Zercher lift, or squat. And again, the variations I just mentioned, the deadlifts with the plates on blocks, standing on blocks in the deficit, out of the rack on the spot pins, Zercher lifts, box squats with specialty bars like the safety squat bar. We're usually working one of those variations, and we're going to work up to a 1 rep max in that lift, and then we're going to cycle to a new lift the following week. So we never do the same lift 2 weeks in a row. We do that to avoid accommodating to any specific movement, and that allows them to constantly try to break records on a weekly basis. After the dynamic effort or the max effort lift, so we go jumps, then we move on to the dynamic or max effort lift depending on the day. Then we usually move to an upper body superset. I like to do some sort of upper body pushing, superset with some sort of upper body pulling. The majority of the press exercises that we do a lot of bench presses with, or overhead presses with the Bandbell bar. If you've seen this is a bar made out of bamboo, made by Bandbell. You suspend weights, usually kettlebells, from bands on the bar, and when you press the bar, because of the way the weights are suspended, it causes the bar to shake or to vibrate, and it creates it creates maximum muscular contractions in the muscles being trained. So when you're doing a bench press, it works a lot of the stabilizers around the shoulder. It's fantastic. A lot of my athletes that have shoulder injuries can do a lot of benching and a lot of various presses with the Bandbell bar with no issues. I've used it successfully with some of the athletes who are trying to regain some range of motion from injuries or just wear and tear over the course of their athletic career. It's a great bar to implement. We do it quite a bit. We do a lot of floor presses with barbells. We do a lot of floor presses with specialty bars like the Swiss bar that's got horizontal grips on it. We do a lot of dumbbell pressing. We do a lot of single arm dumbbell pressing, a lot of kettlebell pressing, whether we're doing kettlebell pressing from the floor, whether we're doing kettlebell presses overhead. One of our favorite variations of the kettlebell press is to sit on the ground in a straddle and alternate the presses overhead. You do that, you lean back just a little bit, places a tremendous amount of stress on the torso while you're doing the overhead pressing. It's great press variation. Another one that we like to do with the kettlebells, we get to a low pulley machine, like a low row machine or a cable crossover machine. We set the pulley all the way down to lowest position, and then we attach an average band, so it's the 2-inch thick band. We quad it up and we loop it through a handle so that the athletes can hook their feet in it. They lay down on their back like they're in guard, and then they pull their knees up to their chest so that they're doing a static contraction for their torso, and then they're going to do some alternating presses with the kettlebells in a floor press position. So this is great because we're getting a lot of static torso work while we're doing either the floor presses or we're doing the seated overhead presses. Again, training economy is something I try to focus on with these guys because there's a lot of different qualities that we're trying to build. So the more we can get out of a lift, the better. So those are some of our favorite pressing variations. Again, with the traditional bar, sometimes we'll do some incline pressing, some decline pressing, some flat pressing, some floor presses. But generally, we're not working up to a max. We're generally doing the repeated effort method on these. Sometimes we'll do a heavy 5x5. Sometimes we'll do higher reps because we're working a little bit more for muscular endurance. I don't do a lot of heavy pressing with these athletes, again, because I'm trying to minimize the wear and tear on the shoulders. So we keep the pressing to a submaximal effort or usually a repeated effort variation, but that's the type of pressing that we do with these guys. We also do a lot of push-ups. Push-ups in the rack on a barbell, plyo push-ups where they're exploding off the ground and landing on various height boxes. Push-ups off suspension trainers like the Lifeline Jungle Gym or something like that, or TRX, but we do a lot of push-ups as well. So that's a lot of the variety in the pressing that we do, but it goes from everything from overhead to horizontal, incline, decline. We press from all different angles. It's important to work strength through all angles with these athletes. You know, if you just work pressing the horizontal plane, they're going to be screwed when they get their arm up overhead. So we got to make sure that they're strong in all positions. Again, we superset a lot of our pushing exercises, our pressing exercises with some sort of pull. Pull-ups are kind of the staple for us in our training here. So we do a lot of pull-up variations. We do overhand, underhand, wide grip, close grip, parallel grip. We do a lot of gi pull-ups. Going back to a training economy, we like to take a gi, throw it over a pull-up bar, and then hang on to the lapel or onto the sleeves of the gi and do our pull-ups that way, because that builds a tremendous amount of grip and forearm strength, and it's strength that's going to be very useful for these BJJ players. So a lot of our pull-ups are done like that. We do have some specialty attachments we use for the cables. We do a variety of pull-downs and rows with them. We do a lot of bent-over rows with barbells or a grappler device. We do a lot of chest-supported rows. We do a lot of inverted rows on the squat. In a squat rack, we set up a bar, hang upside down, and we do kind of a parallel modified pull-up. Usually put the feet on a stability ball for an added challenge. But again, just like our pressing, we're doing pulls in all planes. We're doing shrugs, we're doing horizontal pulls, we're doing pulls from overhead, because we're trying to get these athletes strong in a bunch of different planes of movement. So again, after our jumps, we do our primary lift, whether it's dynamic effort or max effort method, some sort of deadlift or squat or good morning. Then we move on to push-pull superset. where we go through a variation. We select one exercise for that day and we do a variation of, and we change week to week, just like we do our other lifts, but we superset the push and the pulling exercise. So whether it's some sort of press, pull up, row, whatever, we always superset the two to keep the athletes moving. We don't take a lot of rest in these sessions. Next, we move on to some sort of posterior chain exercise, and we superset with a lot of torso work. So we're doing a lot of back raises. We're doing a lot of good mornings. We're doing a lot of reverse hyper extensions. We're doing a lot of glute ham raises. We're doing a lot of inverse curls. So something that hits the back side of the body, hip extension exercise. Do a lot of work for the back side of the body. Hip bridges are crucial. Throws, being able to punch and kick hard. All these qualities are important for the combative athlete, and a lot of it comes back to the hips. So we do a lot of work for the hips. We do a lot of work for the torso. We always superset our posterior chain exercises with some sort of static and rotational exercise for the torso. So we do a lot of cable chops. We do a lot of barbell, like full contact twists in our grappler or landmine, whatever you want to call it. We do some kayaking movements with the band bell bar with some weights hanging off of, where we sit on either a back raise or an incline bench, get the abs contracted statically, and then we rotate the bar almost like you're paddling a kayak. That is a great static exercise for the torso. Again, a lot of cable chops, a lot of work with the bands where we're doing some type of core static exercise, some sort of anti-rotation exercise, stir the pots on a stability ball, various pulls with the cables. Again, we're just trying to build up a huge static contraction in the abs, and we do a ton of work. Sometimes we're doing side bends, sometimes we're doing medicine ball Russian twists. We do lower body Russian twists or windshield wipers, whatever you want to call them, leg raises. We just do a huge amount of ab work. You need to have a really strong torso. You need to have strong midsection. You need to have strong lower back. So again, we do a lot of work for the posterior chain and the torso after we do our push-pull superset. And then we move on to some sort of conditioning exercise, for lack of a better term, but we do either a lot of work with the sled or we do a lot of work in the belt squat. With the sled, we can attach it to a weightlifting belt and just walk forward with it. We can walk backward with it. That builds up the hamstrings when you're walking forward, and the hips, builds up the quads when you're walking backwards. We walk sideways, which is great for the ankles, the knees, the hips. We put the upper body straps on. We can do some presses. We can do some pulls. Any exercise that you can do with dumbbells or cables, you can do with the sled. Any press, any tricep extension, any pull, any bicep curl, any lateral shoulder movement. You can do ab work. You can do various chops with the sled. You can hold the straps over your shoulders and do ab curls as you're walking. You can walk with the straps between your legs, works the lower back and the glutes. We work a lot of variety into our sled dragging. We're either pulling heavy weights for short distances, we're pulling moderate weights for moderate distances, or we're pulling very light weights for long distances. So we're using it for strength, we're using it for conditioning, we're using it for restoration. But we do a lot of work in the sled. We also do a lot of work in the belt squat. So usually we're going to do a big sled workout one of the days, we're going to do a big belt squat workout the other day, or sometimes we do both. Again, there's a lot of, nothing's really static here. We just kind of work for the individual fighter's needs. But with the belt squat work, we do a lot of carries, a lot of loaded carries. We do a lot of pummeling, in the belt squat, where somebody's got the load on their hips and they pummel with one of the partners. Do a lot of shadow boxing in the belt squat. We do carries with the band bell bar overhead in the Zercher position. Some of the fighters will hold it up like they're doing a bicep curl to build up their shoulders. We do a lot of kettlebell work, kettlebell cleans, kettlebell swings, kettlebell snatches while they're wearing the belt. We do our battling rope work in the belt squat. We do loaded, we carry medicine balls. We do medicine ball throws and catches. There's just, sandbag lifting, you name it. We do this all in the belt squat so that we're building muscular endurance while the athlete has a tremendous amount of weight pulling down on their hips. And we do these for time. We do very short sets of 1 to 2 minutes where they're using very heavy loads. We'll do very long sets, 5 minutes or more, where they're just continuously working in the belt squat. So it's a huge, huge part of our training. And it's something that I learned from Louis Simmons and Tom Barry up at Westside Barbell when I first went up there a few years ago. I did not have a belt squat machine. It took me one visit and I got one, and we've been benefiting ever since. So big thanks to Lou and Tom up at Westside, because that really has had a huge impact on the way that I train my athletes, in particular these combative athletes that I'm talking about in this video. After either the belt squat or the sled work, we always finish with neck and grip. We always do a ton of neck work. We do neck bridging on the floor, like wrestlers' bridges. We do static work with the neck, where you're holding, one of the things I like to do is take a stability ball and just press your head into it, all 4 positions, where you're holding static contractions. like to put a neck harness on, do neck harness lifts, or do neck extensions, flexions, lateral flexions against a band, or we attach a neck harness to a cable pulley. We lift weights with the neck harness from the ground. There's a variety of neck drills that we do, but we do a lot of neck work, and then we do a lot of grip work. We do a lot of static work where we're pinching like plates together, and you're just holding the smooth sides of the plates. You're holding it for time. We pinch hex dumbbells. We hold them by the dumbbell head. We've got some various grip devices that we use, like the Rolling Thunder handle from Iron Mind. We've got the hub lift attachment. We've got the COC grippers. We don't really use those for training. Those are more testers, or sometimes we screw around at the end of the workout with them. But it is a great gauge of grip strength to see if they can close a number 1 or a number 2 or whatever. You do a lot of hand health exercise. You can take a big 5-gallon bucket. You fill it up with either dry rice or sand. You submerge your hands under the sand or in the rice, and you open your hands, you close your hands, you make fists. This is great for hand health and hand strength. There's just a variety of exercises that we do with the grip. You know, sometimes we do wrist roller, sometimes we do, you know, forearm flexion and extension, but we do ton of variation on those for the neck and the grip. So that's usually how we finish up the workout. Again, just to recap, we always start with our jumps. We go for 40 jumps twice a week on our 2 main strength training sessions. Then we move on to our primary lift. It's either going to be a dynamic effort lift or a max effort lift, depending on the day. Then after that, we move on to our push-pull superset, where we do some sort of pressing exercise, some sort of pulling exercise. Then we move on to our posterior chain torso superset, where we're working the back side of the body, as well as all aspects of the torso. Then we finish up with either conditioning with the sled or the belt squat, and then we move on to our neck and grip. So those are our 2 primary workouts that we do, usually about 3 days apart, for our grappling athletes and our combative athletes here in the gym. Again, the main focus is that we want to make sure that they're able to recover from these workouts so that it enhances the sport-specific practice. And we want to focus on training economy. We want to get the most out of the least number of exercises while still training the full body. And we work a lot of exercise variation in to prevent accommodation. Again, this is just the strength training. We do usually 4 or more conditioning sessions throughout the week, where they're working on aerobic energy system development. They're working on anaerobic energy system development. There's a wide variety of exercises, and there's different ways that we progress through aerobic and anaerobic training, especially leading up to a fight, or if they're just starting out with me and their conditioning sucks, which I found to be the case with a lot of these athletes. So we want to make sure that we're building up, you know, give them a good gas tank, make sure that their aerobic system's really well developed. And then something that goes along with that is muscular endurance. You know, that's kind of what we're working with the exercises after the dynamic of the max effort lift. We're doing a lot of repetition effort work because we're trying to build up muscular endurance. You know, if the muscles fatigue, you're going to gas out during a fight or during a grappling match. So, you know, take for instance one of the exercises that we do, and I got this, I think, from Tom Barry at Westside Barbell. When they're walking in the belt squat, I might have them take a football and hold it, you know, like they're doing a rear naked choke, and just squeeze the ball as tight as they can. You know, instead of doing, you know, you'd think like a strong bicep would be important because you're flexing your elbow when you're choking somebody. So you would think doing heavy bicep curls would build that up, but that's not the case, because a choke is an isometric exercise. If you're doing reps of bicep curls, you might be building strong biceps, but your ability to contract them with a high rate of force isometrically isn't going to be there, which is what a choke is. And I've had one of my grapplers, Chris, when he was competing at the Fight to Win Atlanta about a year or so ago, he fatigued his arms, you know, tremendously. He won his match, but at the end of the match, he told me that his arms were pretty fatigued because he kept trying to work a rear naked choke on his opponent. He wasn't able to sink it in and get the submission, but his arms fatigued dramatically because of that. So we started working these isometric choking exercises where you hold a football in the elbow between the body and you just squeeze it isometrically, and you contract as hard as you can for as long as you can, and that builds up a tremendous amount of strength that's very applicable to what they're doing. So we do a lot of work for muscular endurance, you know, power endurance, strength endurance for these athletes. And you can't just lift low rep heavy weight all the time. You've got to do higher repetition work. You've got to do higher duration work. You've got to work those isometrics in there, quasi-isometrics. You've got to do the things that allow them to compete in their sport and not fatigue, or to put off fatiguing as long as possible. So those are very important aspects that we work into the program. And then in addition to the cardiovascular conditioning, I talked about the aerobic and the anaerobic conditioning that they're doing sometimes 4 or more days a week. We also focus on flexibility, mobility, and then if the athlete has some joint issues, if they're rehabilitating an injury, if they're trying to regain some range of motion, if they're just trying to build up the density and the health of the connective tissues and the joints, we might implement some joint exercises throughout the week, you know, restoration exercises and things like that. So there's a lot of stuff that they're doing. And when you look at how all this stuff comes together, all of this physical training needs to enhance the sport practice and the sporting form. If it doesn't do that, if they're not able to recover from it, you're not doing the athlete any good. So it's really important to make sure that you're implementing physical training that they can recover from and that it enhances the sport, which is the end goal. Some athletes can tolerate a higher volume of training. Some can only tolerate, you know, a lower volume of training. This stuff needs to be individualized, and you as the trainer need to sit down and figure out what the qualities required are of your athlete's sport, where your athlete ranks among those qualities, and then how to get them closer to the optimal level of physical preparation that they need to be for their sport, and then always build on that. Always assess, always reassess, and just strive to make them the best athlete that they can be through proper physical development. And if you do that, you're going to have a very successful program. So hopefully this video gives you an idea of how I work the strength training aspects into the program of my combative athletes here at EPTS. If you've got any questions, please feel free to leave those in the comments section below this video. And if you've got any future topics that you want to see addressed in one of these videos, leave that in the comments section as well, and I'll be sure to include those in future videos. So hopefully you're enjoying these video series. Again, if you got any questions, leave them in the comments sections below. And as always, until next time, stay strong, stay healthy, and we'll see you next time.